3 days before Christmas, I was sitting at my desk in the Portland office surrounded by twinkling lights, peppermint-scented candles, and coworkers humming along to holiday music when my phone buzzed. Then buzzed again. Then a third time, vibrating so hard, it slid an inch across my keyboard. I wiped my hands on my sweater, expecting a message about the white elephant party we were planning for the next day. Instead, I opened the family group chat and felt the world tilt under me. Better if Lauren doesn't show up this year. The words glowed on the screen like a slap. Then Chloe, my younger sister, reacted with a thumbs up. Aunt Patty added a heart emoji like my exclusion was a sweet seasonal moment. The office around me blurred. Laughter turned into static. My stomach dropped so fast it felt like I was falling straight through my chair. I read the message again. Better if Lauren doesn't show up, and something inside me cracked. Ethan's text popped up, on my way to pick you up. Everything okay? I stared at the screen, pulse pounding in my throat. My own family had just uninvited me from Christmas, and if they thought I would stay silent, they didn't know me anymore. I locked my computer and slipped into an empty meeting room, shutting the door before my legs gave out. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped my phone. This had to be a mistake. A terrible autocorrect. Maybe they meant someone else. But there was only one Lauren in our family, and Chloe's thumbs-up reaction said everything. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't a joke. It was intentional. The strange thing was, I had been excited for Christmas this year. After months of therapy, after rebuilding parts of my life, Mark had dismantled after falling in love with someone kind and grounded like Ethan. I actually believed this holiday might be different. Better. I'd already wrapped gifts for Mom, Dad, and Chloe, hand-picked thoughtful things I'd spent lunchtime browsing for. I had even planned to tell them Ethan and I were moving in together in the spring. I wanted them to see how far I'd come, how different my life was now. How happy I finally felt. Apparently, they didn't want to see any of it. Another text flashed onto the screen from Chloe, sent to the group chat, not to me. Makes sense. Too much drama lately. My chest tightened. Drama. That's what they called it. My attempt to rebuild my life, my decision to set boundaries with Mark. My refusal to let my past define me, apparently all drama. The door to the meeting room creaked as I slumped into a chair, pressing my fist to my mouth to keep from making a sound. I could hear the office humming just outside, keyboards clacking, printers, whirring, coworkers planning Secret Santa. I felt like a ghost floating through someone else's life. My phone buzzed again. Ethan, 5 minutes away. Come outside when you can. I typed back, okay, though my fingers felt numb. As I walked through the office toward the elevator, the festive decorations suddenly felt mocking garlands draped over cubicles, mugs with mistletoe prints, the half-eaten plate of sugar cookies in the break room. Everyone was going home to families eager to see them. I was going home to... what? Silence. A text telling me I wasn't welcome. The freezing air outside slapped my cheeks as I stepped into the wind. Ethan's car pulled up to the curb, and he leaned over to push the door open for me. The warmth of the heater blasted out, fogging my glasses. He took one look at my face, and his smile faded. What happened? I didn't answer. My throat was too tight. Instead, I held out my phone. He took it, read the message, and his expression darkened, not in confusion, not in hesitation, but in instant understanding and anger. They said this to you, he asked quietly. I nodded, staring at my knees. He exhaled slowly, jaw tightening. Lauren, this isn't normal. Something else is going on. His certainty cut through the fog, clouding my thoughts. Deep down, I knew he was right. My family didn't move as a group like this without a reason. And Chloe echoing the sentiment so quickly, Patty hearting it, none of that happened by accident. I leaned back against the seat, letting the heater thaw my frozen fingers. I need to know why, I whispered. I deserve to know. Ethan reached over, lacing his fingers through mine. Then we'll find out. together. I looked out the window as he pulled onto the snowy street, Christmas lights blurring against the glass. Their text had shut a door. But I wasn't going to disappear quietly. If they didn't want me at Christmas, I was going to find out exactly why, and what I uncovered would change everything. Ethan drove us toward my apartment, snowflakes tapping softly against the windshield, as though trying to fill the silence between us. I watched the Christmas lights blur into streaks of red and gold along the road, each glowing strand reminding me of a life I thought I still belonged to. My phone rested in my lap like a small bomb, one message capable of detonating every bit of hope I'd had for this holiday. "Talk to me," Ethan said gently, keeping one hand on the wheel, the other resting near mine as if offering an anchor. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I didn't fight with anyone. I didn't say anything wrong. I've barely even talked to them the past week because I've been preparing for Christmas. How did it go from normal to—" I trailed off, unable to say the words better if Lauren doesn't show up. Ethan's jaw tightened. "This isn't about something you did in the last week." I turned to him. "What do you mean, he said carefully. "This feels bigger, like something that didn't start yesterday, or even this month." A chill ran through me, and it wasn't from the cold outside. He pulled into the parking garage beneath my building and killed the engine. The car hummed quietly as heat continued to pour from the vents. He turned toward me fully, now his expression soft but serious. "Has anything happened recently with your family?" he asked. "Anything that might explain them reacting like this?" I let my head fall back against the seat as a disorienting wave of memories hit me, small moments over the past year that I had brushed aside. My mom sighing heavily when I mentioned therapy. Chloe rolling her eyes when I talked about changing up my life. Dad avoiding any conversation about Mark. A sudden shift from closeness to distance that had crept in without my noticing, like a draft sneaking through a cracked window. There were signs, I admitted quietly. I just didn't want to see them. Ethan squeezed my hand. "Tell me." I took a deep breath. It started after the divorce. Mark made sure everyone heard his version first. That I was unstable, emotional. That I shut down. That I changed overnight. And my family, they believed him. They didn't even ask me. Ethan's brows tightened. "So they've been seeing you through a story he wrote." "Yeah." My laugh came out hollow. One they never questioned. We went upstairs to my apartment, kicking off our shoes and sitting on the couch with the kind of tiredness that comes from more than just physical exhaustion. Ethan draped a blanket over my legs and sat facing me. "Do you think," he began slowly, "they still see you as the version of you he created?" My chest tightened in that familiar, painful way. Sometimes I think they liked her better. Ethan didn't deny it. He didn't soften it. He simply nodded with a sadness that told me he understood. I looked down at my hands, at the faint tremble running through them. I thought, by bringing you this year, maybe they'd finally see the real me. Someone stable. Someone happy. I swallowed. Someone worth inviting. "You are worth inviting," he said firmly. "Their reactions don't change your value." I blinked hard, trying not to cry again. I felt wrung out, emotionally scraped raw. He reached forward, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. "What you're feeling is valid, Lauren. Every bit of it." I leaned into his touch, letting myself breathe for a moment. After a long silence, he asked, "Do you want to tell me what happened with Mark?" The full story. I hesitated. No one had ever asked with that kind of sincerity before. For most people, my divorce was old news, messy, painful, but in the past. They never wanted the details. They never wanted to understand. But Ethan wasn't most people. "Yes," I said quietly. I think it's time." And so I told him. I told him how Mark and I met in our mid-20s, how charming he was, how he made me feel chosen in a way I didn't realize was hunger until much later. I told him how the criticism started small jokes about my clothes, my decision-making, my ambitions, then slowly deepened into something sharper, something that left bruises on my confidence, even if none appeared on my skin. I told him about my parents praising Mark constantly, saying he was patient with my emotions, even though he was the one stirring them up. I told him how my mom believed he balanced me, how Chloe thought he was the gold standard, how Dad loved having someone around who understood sports as well as he did. I told him about therapy, about the night I realized I was shrinking, about the morning I packed a suitcase while Mark slept and walked out before I talked myself into staying one more month. Ethan listened without interrupting, without asking for proof, without questioning the severity. He simply held every word like it mattered. When I finally finished, my voice was hoarse, and my hands had stopped trembling. He exhaled slowly. "I'm so proud of you." "For leaving," I whispered. "For surviving," he said. "And for rebuilding." My breath caught. He shifted closer. "Lauren, what your family did today wasn't about you. It was about the story they've been fed for years, the one Mark wanted them to believe." A sick, cold truth settled in my stomach. "You think he's still influencing them?" I think Ethan said softly that this didn't start today. "And it won't end unless you find out the whole truth." I stared at him, heart pounding. Because he was right, and I already knew who could help me unravel what had been happening behind my back. "I need to talk to Chloe," I whispered, "before this turns into something even bigger." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll call her. When you're ready." Snowflakes drifted past the window, faint and glowing as though the whole world was holding its breath. I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself and leaned against Ethan's shoulder, gathering the strength I'd need for whatever was coming next. I wasn't going to hide. Not anymore. Chloe picked up on the second ring, her voice bright and sugary in a way that instantly set my teeth on edge. "Hey, sis. Everything okay?" The casual tone made bile rise in my throat. "No," I said plainly. "Not really." A pause. Then a laugh. "Oh. Is this about Mom's message? Chloe?" I said slowly. "Mom didn't just send a message. She uninvited me from Christmas. And you," my voice caught before I could stop it, "you reacted with a thumbs up." The line went quiet for a moment. When she finally spoke, her tone was defensive, irritated. "Well, yeah, I mean, I didn't think it was a big deal. Mom and Dad said you've been acting weird lately." I closed my eyes, pressing a hand to my forehead. "Acting weird? How, Chloe?" "What did they tell you that you've changed?" she said as if it were obvious. "Ever since the divorce. You're distant. You're different." And honestly, her voice softened, but not kindly. "It's been kind of dramatic." I felt the familiar burn behind my eyes, but I swallowed hard. "Chloe, I've been healing. I'm in therapy. I'm literally doing everything I can to get healthy again." "Yeah, but that's the thing," Chloe said, as if she were explaining something simple to a child. "Healthy people don't change their personality overnight. They don't cut off family. They don't move in with a boyfriend after only a few months." I stared at the wall, stunned. I haven't cut off family. I've been trying to have healthier boundaries. "See," she said quickly. "That's what I mean. Everything is boundaries with you now. Boundaries this, boundaries that. It feels like you're just pushing all of us away." It took everything in me not to scream. I'm not pushing anyone away. I'm trying to stop letting people walk all over me. Chloe let out a breath like she'd been waiting to say this. "Mom and Dad think you're getting influenced. Maybe by Ethan. Maybe by therapy. Maybe by your past. It's all mixed up. So let me get this straight," I said quietly. "They think I'm unstable. And instead of talking to me, they decided to ambush me by kicking me out of Christmas." "Well," Chloe hesitated. "They just think it's better to avoid triggers right now." "Triggers?" My voice cracked. "What does that even mean, Chloe?" "What triggers?" She sighed dramatically. I don't know, Lauren. You know Mom. She overreacts. She said she didn't want a meltdown if you and Ethan showed up acting all intense. I stared at the snow falling outside my window, each flake dissolving on the glass. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt this hollow. Who told her I'd have a meltdown? I whispered. Silence. Then too quickly, I don't know. I knew that tone. Chloe was hiding something. Chloe. Silence again. Chloe, tell me. A shaky inhale. I'm not supposed to say anything. My heart lurched. You need to tell me what's going on. She exhaled loudly. Fine. Mom and Dad said they're worried because Mark told them things. Every nerve in my body went cold. What things? I don't know all of it. She rushed on. Just that you had some episodes, emotional stuff, that you were talking about identity confusion, that you were fragile. I never said that. I said, barely getting the words out. None of that ever happened. Well, that's not what Mark said, she snapped back. And honestly, he was always the stable one. You know that. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Chloe wasn't trying to hurt me. This was worse. She believed every word. Mark lied. I said, my voice shaking with fury I hadn't felt in months. He gaslit me for years. He isolated me. He twisted everything until I doubted my own mind. And now he's doing it to all of you. Chloe scoffed. Oh my God, Lauren, not everything is gaslighting just because you don't like what he said. Chloe. I cried. He hurt me. Then why did he stay in touch with us? She challenged. Why does he keep checking in on you? Why does he still care? He doesn't care, I said loud enough that Ethan glanced over at me. He cares about control. He cares about being right. He cares about keeping the narrative where he wants it. Another silence. This one different. Colder. You've changed, Chloe said softly, and the disappointment in her voice sliced me open. You're not the Lauren I grew up with. No, I whispered. I'm not. And thank God for that. She didn't speak. I continued, steadier now. I need you to understand something. Mark has been feeding you lies. He's been feeding Mom and Dad lies. And you've all been repeating them without ever asking me what was true. How do we know what's true? She whispered. You ask, I said simply. You talk to me. You trust me. I'm your sister. She inhaled shakily. I don't know what to believe right now. That's okay, I said, even though it wasn't. Just don't let him speak for me anymore. Chloe didn't respond. When she finally spoke again, her voice was small. I need to think. Take your time, I said. But Chloe, don't let someone else rewrite who I am. She ended the call without saying goodbye. I set the phone down on my lap, feeling exhausted and strangely clear. Chloe wasn't the enemy. She was a reflection of the story Mark had crafted, a story that had grown roots in my family long before I ever realized it. Ethan sat beside me and touched my knee gently. How was it? I leaned into him, letting the tears come. Bad, I whispered. But at least now I know how deep his lies went. Ethan wrapped his arms around me as I cried softly into his shoulder. And somewhere beneath the hurt, beneath the betrayal, beneath the pain of Chloe's disbelief, a new thought formed, quiet but solid. If my family was choosing Mark's version of me, then I would have to uncover the truth piece by piece, no matter what it cost. I spent most of the night lying awake, staring at the ceiling while the glow of the street lamp outside spilled across my bedroom. Every time I closed my eyes, Chloe's voice echoed back at me. You've changed. Mark said you had episodes. He was always the stable one. The shock of hearing my own sister defend my ex-husband had left a bruise so deep it ached every time I took a breath. By morning, I felt like I'd been scraped raw on the inside. But I also felt something else, something sharper, like resolve. I needed the truth. Documented, undeniable truth. Ethan brewed coffee in the kitchen as I sat cross-legged on the couch with my laptop balanced on my knees. the cold light of the screen reflected in my eyes as I typed in my email password. My hands trembled slightly as I logged into the account I rarely used anymore. It was the email I'd created years ago, one Mark never knew existed. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Ethan asked gently, setting a mug next to me. "No," I said honestly. "But I have to be." I opened the inbox. At first it looked empty. Just spam newsletters and one old receipt for a pair of boots I bought years ago. But then I clicked on the archived folder. My breath caught. Dozens of emails, 50, 60 more, sat silently in the archive like tiny landmines waiting to go off. All from the same sender, Mom. The earliest was from 3 years ago, the most recent. 2 months after my divorce. I stared at the list, my chest tightening until I could barely breathe. Lauren, Ethan murmured, sitting beside me. I opened the first one. Subject: Just wanted to check in about Lauren. It wasn't from my mom, it was forwarded from her. The original sender was Mark. Vivian. I'm worried about her mental state again. She had another emotional shutdown this morning. I'm trying my best, but I feel like I'm losing her. Can you keep an eye out when she visits? My stomach dropped. This never happened. Not once. I never shut down. I never had any kind of episode. Mark wrote fiction, and he presented it as concern. I clicked the next email. She's been waking up at night and crying for no reason. I've tried to help, but I think she's becoming unstable. I'm scared for her. Another lie, then another. She forgot how to get home from work yesterday. I think she disassociated. That never happened. Please don't bring up anything stressful during Christmas. She's fragile right now. My jaw tightened. I remembered that Christmas. I remembered how weirdly careful everyone was, how they avoided certain topics, how Mom whispered to Dad in the kitchen while staring at me like I was a ticking bomb. They weren't careful because I seemed unstable. They were careful because Mark had told them I was. That son of Ethan muttered under his breath as the next email loaded. Subject: Concerning behavior. Vivian. I think Lauren might have early signs of identity disturbance. She talked about feeling lost the other day. Please don't mention this to her. It will only make her panic. I pressed a hand over my mouth. I remembered that conversation. I had told Mark I felt lost in my career path, wondering if I should switch fields. A normal conversation. A vulnerable one. And he turned it into a clinical symptom, presented it behind my back as proof I was unstable. Every email was a twist of the knife. Every forwarded note from my mother proved how deeply she accepted his word as truth, never questioning, never asking me first, never giving me the benefit of the doubt. I clicked the newest message. Subject: Update on Lauren. Older than the text message from yesterday, but recent enough to reveal everything. Vivian. I'm concerned she's slipping again. Therapy isn't helping, if anything, it's making her more confrontational. I worry what might happen if she shows up to family gatherings in this state. Please prepare Chloe and Robert. It might be safer if she stayed home this year. My hands shook so violently I almost dropped the laptop. Safer if she stayed home. Better if Lauren doesn't show up. It was Mark's idea. I felt the oxygen leave my lungs. I curled my hands into fists, nails digging into my palms as a wave of hot, dizzying rage washed over me. He orchestrated the entire thing, I whispered. He planted every seed. He made sure they doubted me. He created this version of me, and they believed him without question. Ethan wrapped an arm around me. I'm so sorry, Lauren. I blinked back tears. He didn't stop after the divorce. He didn't stop even when I left. He just switched audiences. He used them to keep controlling the narrative. And it worked, Ethan said quietly, until now. I closed the laptop and stared at nothing, my heart pounding in my ears as the truth settled like iron in my chest. Chloe's reaction made sense now. Mom's text made sense. The distance, the coldness, the quiet skepticism every time I talked about therapy, it all traced back to him. to the emails he'd been sending behind my back for years. He didn't just lie about me, he built an entire identity for me. A fragile, unstable, dramatic version of me that made them doubt everything I said, everything I did, everything I was. I wasn't fighting my family. I was fighting the ghost he had created. "We have to show someone," Ethan said softly. "Someone who'll believe you." I wiped my eyes with the sleeve of my sweater. There's one person who saw the truth before anyone else. Someone he hated because she wasn't fooled. Who? I took a shaky breath. Paige. Paige answered on the second ring, her voice breathless like she'd just rushed in from outside. "Lauren." "Oh my God, hi. Are you okay?" The sound of her voice, familiar and warm even after all this time, made something inside me crack open. "Not really," I said, my voice trembling. I need to see you." A pause, brief but full of recognition. "Name the place. I'll be there." We met at Evergreen Cafe, the little corner spot with mismatched chairs and cinnamon sugar air where we practically lived during college. I hadn't set foot inside in years, not since Mark made snide comments about the pretentious atmosphere and how Paige's influence was messing with my priorities. As I stepped inside, the bell above the door chimed softly. I spotted Paige, instantly curly brown hair, thick scarf hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Her eyes widened when she saw me, and she stood so fast her chair scraped across the floor. "Come here," she whispered. We hugged for a long moment, her arms tight around me in a way that didn't require explanations or justifications. When we finally sat down, she studied my face with a mixture of worry and relief. "You look different," she said gently. "More yourself, but also exhausted." I found something. My voice broke. "And everything finally makes sense." She leaned forward. "Tell me." I opened my laptop and turned it toward her, pulling up the archived emails. Paige's eyes scanned the first one and her lips parted in disbelief. This is Mark?" she whispered. "He wrote all this?" I nodded. "For years. Behind my back. To my mother." Paige pressed both hands to her mouth. "Oh my God. Lauren, this is psychological warfare." My throat tightened. "I know." She reached out and squeezed my wrist. "I'm so sorry. I tried God. I tried to warn you. But he kept pushing me out, making you feel like I was the problem." "I know," I said again, a tear slipping down my cheek. "And I'm sorry I didn't listen. I'm sorry I believed him." "Hey." She tapped my hand. "That's what abusers do. They isolate you. They twist everything. They make you doubt the people who actually love you." "I didn't realize how far it went," I whispered. Paige exhaled slowly. "I did." She sat back in her chair, eyes drifting toward the window as if replaying old memories. "Do you remember the night at your apartment when he got mad because we were laughing too loudly?" My stomach dropped. "Yeah." "He told me to leave," she said quietly. "He said I was a bad influence. He said you were too emotionally fragile to handle my chaotic energy." My mouth fell open. "He never told me that." "He didn't need to," Paige said softly. "He made sure you felt it. After that night, you stopped inviting me over. You canceled plans. You apologized constantly for things that weren't your fault. Guilt pulsed through me, thick and heavy. I thought I was just trying to avoid conflict. You were trying to survive." Paige corrected. "And he made sure your lifelines got cut one by one." I swallowed hard. He monitored my texts. He checked my emails. He tracked my location. I didn't see it until it was too late. Paige's expression darkened. "I once caught him reading over your shoulder when you replied to me." He pretended it was nothing, but his eyes were watching every word. A shiver crawled down my spine. "But the worst part?" Paige continued. "At that dinner party 3 years ago, when he grabbed your wrist under the table." I froze. I saw that, she said quietly. He squeezed so hard your whole arm tensed, and the look on your face, you looked embarrassed and scared. My breath hitched. I had buried that moment so deeply I'd convinced myself I imagined it. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. Because every time I tried to talk about him, he had already primed you to think I didn't like him. Paige shook her head. He poisoned the well. You didn't push me away, you were pulled. Tears blurred my vision. I'm so sorry, I whispered again. She squeezed my hand across the table. Don't apologize for surviving something designed to break you. We sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the truth settle between us. Then Paige straightened. So your family believed him? They didn't just believe him, I said, voice shaking. They built their entire view of me around his lies. Paige's eyes softened. Do they know the truth yet? Some of it, I said. But not everything, and not like this. She looked at me for a long moment, then took a deep breath. Lauren, if you want, I can tell them what I saw. All of it. A wave of emotion hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the table. You'd do that? Of course, she said without hesitation. You're not alone anymore. And I'm done watching him control your life from a distance. I reached across the table and hugged her tightly. When we pulled back, she wiped at her eyes and smiled shakily. So, she said, sitting up straighter, determination sharpening her voice. What's next? I closed the laptop and felt something inside me click into place, a quiet, fierce certainty. We tell them the truth, I said. All of it. Paige nodded once like a soldier receiving orders. Then let's burn his narrative to the ground. The morning after confronting the situation with my family, I woke up feeling strangely hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only the outline behind. The sun pushed weakly through my bedroom curtains, but even the light felt dull. I lay there for several minutes staring at the ceiling, replaying every word from the previous day. The dinner scene, the accusations, the disbelief in my parents' eyes, the tremor in my brother's voice when he defended Mark. Eventually, I forced myself to sit up. Today wasn't a day for hiding. Today, I needed answers. And there was only one person who could give me clarity that wasn't tainted by manipulation, Dr. Ortiz. I texted her a simple message. Emergency session, please, it's important. The reply came less than 2 minutes later. Come in at noon, I'll clear the hour. I exhaled shakily, as if I'd been holding my breath since yesterday. Noon couldn't come fast enough. I kept pacing my apartment, my thoughts swirling around the leaked messages, Mark's lies, and the sickening realization that my family had accepted his words as gospel for years. My sense of reality felt stretched thin, like a thread pulled so tight it could snap with one wrong move. At 11:15, I grabbed my coat and left early. When I arrived at Dr. Ortiz's office, she opened the door before I even knocked. Her expression was calm, steady, the kind of grounding presence I desperately needed. Come in, Lauren, she said softly. I stepped inside and sank immediately into the worn leather chair across from hers. The scent of eucalyptus drifted faintly through the room, the soft gurgle of the tabletop water fountain offering a rhythm to breathe against. I finally felt my lungs open. Tell me what happened, she said. I told her everything. The family group text, the thumbs-up reactions, the messages I'd uncovered, the dinner at my parents' house, Mark's rewritten history of our relationship, the intervention they'd planned behind my back, the way they had treated me as if I were fragile, unstable, broken. Dr. Ortiz listened without interrupting, only nodding occasionally, her posture relaxed but attentive. When I finally stopped talking, my throat raw, she folded her hands in her lap. Lauren, she said gently, what you're describing is a prolonged pattern of gaslighting, first from Mark, and then, unfortunately, reinforced by your family. The word hit me with dull force. I thought maybe I was exaggerating. You're not. Gaslighting works precisely because it makes you doubt your own perception. The abuser manipulates your reality until you can't tell what's true anymore. It's deeply psychological, deeply damaging, and extremely isolating. I swallowed. He made everyone think I was unstable. He planted seeds, she said. But you have to remember your family chose to water them. I blinked. So you're saying it's their fault? I'm saying their behavior is their responsibility? They believed him because doing so required less introspection than questioning their own biases. It was easier to assume something was wrong with you than to confront the possibility that someone they trusted, someone charming and well-liked, was abusing you. The words cut deep, but they also soothed something inside me. A bruise finally acknowledged. "What do I do?" I whispered. "That depends," she said. "What do you want?" I looked down at my hands. "I don't want to cut them off. They're my family." "But I can't let them treat me like this anymore." Dr. Ortiz nodded. "Boundaries are not punishment. They are self-preservation. You can choose limited contact. You can choose distance. You can choose silence. What matters is that you choose, not them, not Mark." A lump rose in my throat. I feel guilty. That's expected. Guilt is the oldest emotional leash in family systems. But guilt does not mean you are wrong. I pressed my palms against my eyes. I just don't understand how they didn't see it. "Because they weren't looking," she said simply. "Mark groomed them as much as he groomed you. He fed them a story, and they liked the story better than the truth. It made them feel involved, heroic, even like they were supporting a concerned, caring husband, trying to help his troubled wife." Something inside my chest twisted painfully. So they saw me as a burden. A project she corrected. Something to fix, not someone to understand. I let out a shaky breath. "So how do I stop them from doing this to me again?" Dr. Ortiz leaned forward slightly. "By reclaiming your narrative, by choosing whose voices you allow into your life, by recognizing that your worth does not hinge on their acceptance." I stared at her. "It sounds so easy when you say it." "It's not easy," she said with a soft smile. "It's just necessary." I sat quietly for several seconds, letting the words settle into my bones. "Lauren," she added gently, "you're not broken. You never were. You were abused. Those are not the same thing." My throat tightened again, but this time it wasn't from fear or shame. It was from something like relief. And now she continued. "You're healing. Not because of your family, but in spite of them." A long exhale left my lungs. "So what do I do now?" "You decide how much space you need," she said, "and then you take it." When the session ended, I stepped outside into the cold Denver air, but for the first time in days, I felt something warm inside me, a spark of clarity, of self-trust returning. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. A new message. From my mother. "Lauren, we need to talk. There are things you don't understand." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then, for the first time ever, I didn't rush to reply. I slipped my phone into my pocket, got into the car, and drove away, choosing for once myself. I ignored my mother's message for the rest of the day, letting it sit unread in my notifications while I cleaned my apartment, folded laundry, and tried to busy my hands with anything that wasn't emotional damage control. By evening, I was sitting cross-legged on the floor with a half-finished puzzle in front of me when my phone buzzed again, this time with a name I hadn't expected to see. "Aunt Miriam." "Lauren, can we talk?" "It's important." For a moment, I just stared at the screen. Aunt Miriam had always been the quiet one at family gatherings, never the first to speak, never the one to stir the pot. But she was kind. She had slipped me 20s and birthday cards, stood up for me when my mother nitpicked my weight, smiled at me like she actually saw me. Her thumbs up on the family group chat, though, that had felt like a knife. I hesitated before answering. "Sure. Call me." Her call came instantly, as if she'd been waiting with the phone in her hand. "Lauren." Her voice was soft, almost shaky. "I'm here," I said, keeping my tone neutral. She inhaled sharply. I owe you an apology. A really big one. I closed my eyes. Another part of me tensed, not just from pain, but from caution. Okay, I'm listening. You're right about what's been happening, she said quietly. And you need to know. I didn't approve of any of it. My throat tightened. Then why did you give a thumbs up? Miriam? You agreed with them. I know, she whispered, and I'm ashamed of it. But the truth is, I didn't want to be the only one objecting. Your mother and Mark shaped the narrative so carefully, so convincingly, that speaking against it felt like stepping into a storm. A bitter laugh escaped me. So you just let me take the hit? I did, she said, voice breaking, and I regret it more than you know. Silence stretched between us, punctuated only by her uneven breathing. Then she continued, Lauren, this wasn't just your family being misguided. Mark inserted himself into conversations constantly. He called your mother weakly. He called your father. He even called me. He told us you were having emotional episodes, that you were unstable, that he was worried you might lash out if we pushed too hard. My stomach twisted. Episodes? What episodes? He claimed you screamed at him in public, she said, that you were forgetting things, that you were changing personalities after the divorce. He even implied, she stopped, voice wavering, implied what I demanded, that you might be self-medicating, that you couldn't handle stress, that you were fragile. She swallowed. He said it all with so much concern that we believed him. He made it sound like he was protecting you. A sharp pain shot through my chest. Protecting me, I repeated, incredulous. By turning everyone against me, by controlling the story, she corrected. Mark has always been charming, always persuasive, and I think your parents were comforted by the version of events that made sense to them. A long silence hung between us. Finally, I said, Why are you telling me this now? Because she whispered, I heard your mother today. She's planning another family meeting tomorrow night. Without you. And Mark will be there. My hands curled into fists in my lap. Why would he be there? We're divorced. Because your parents treat him like their son, she said weakly. And because he convinced them he should be involved in discussions about your well-being. He doesn't get to define my well-being, I snapped. I know, that's why I'm calling. She inhaled shakily. They're planning to intervene again. They think you're spiraling because you ignored your mother's message. They think you're becoming unhinged. And Mark is feeding every fear they already have. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. They can't do this. They can't talk about me like I'm some problem to solve. I agree, Miriam said. But you need to know your sister Emily is fully siding with them, and your brother Daniel thinks you're being dramatic. Of course they did. And you? I asked softly. I'm done staying quiet, she said. You deserve someone in that room who isn't swallowing Mark's poison. I'm going to that meeting. I'm going to tell them everything I've seen over the years, everything I never said. Something warm flickered in my chest. You'd do that? Yes. But Lauren, her voice tightened. You need to be ready. Your parents won't like hearing the truth. They might blame you. They might blame me. They might deny everything. But you need to decide, do you want me to speak on your behalf or do you want to come yourself? The room felt suddenly too quiet, too small. Images flashed through my mind. My mother's doubtful stare, my father's dismissive headshake, Mark's carefully crafted look of concern. I swallowed hard. If I go, they'll twist everything I say, I murmured. If you go alone, they'll say you were manipulated by me. Then what do you want to do? She asked. I exhaled slowly. I need time to think. I understand, she said. But whatever you choose, I'm with you. We hung up, and I sat in silence, feeling a strange mixture of fear and clarity settle inside me. The truth was no longer buried. Everyone was choosing sides now. I ran a hand through my hair, my pulse quickening. If my family wanted a meeting about me, then maybe, just maybe, it was time I stopped letting them define me behind closed doors. Maybe it was time to walk into that room myself. Not as the Lauren they pitied, not as the Lauren they doubted, but as the Lauren who finally knew the truth and wasn't afraid to show it. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my family seated in a circle speaking about me like a broken object they needed to fix. By morning, I felt raw, stripped down to bone, but also strangely sharper, like something in me had crystallized overnight. I couldn't let them rewrite me anymore. Not in whispers, not in secret meetings, not with Mark standing at the center like the puppeteer he had always been. The snow had thickened outside my apartment window when I texted Drew. "Can you come over? I need to talk." He replied immediately. "On my way." When he arrived, his coat dusted with flakes, he pulled me into a warm hug before I even finished opening the door. "You okay?" "No," I said honestly. "But I'm getting there." We sat on the couch and I told him everything. Aunt Miriam's call, the planned intervention. Mark's continued involvement. My family's refusal to let go of his lies. Drew listened with his brows drawn together, anger simmering beneath his calm voice. "They're still inviting your ex-husband into family decisions. That's not concern, Lauren. That's control." "I know," I whispered, "and I'm done with it." "So what do you want to do?" he asked. I hesitated. I think I should go. To the meeting." He nodded slowly. "If that's what you want, I'll be with you." His certainty steadied me. "I don't want this to just be another fight," I said. "I want to confront them with truth, not emotion. I want to be calm, clear, unshakable." "You will be," he said. "You already are." Later that afternoon, I called Paige. She picked up on the first ring. "You're going?" she asked before I even spoke. "Yeah, I have to." "Do you want backup?" she asked. "I can be there." I meant what I said. I'll tell them what I saw. A swell of gratitude rose in my chest. "I might need you." "I'll be outside," she said. "Just say the word." The hours before the meeting crawled by thick with dread and resolve. I showered dressed in a soft navy sweater and dark jeans, nothing dramatic, nothing performative. I wanted to look like myself. Not the Lauren they pitied, not the Lauren they doubted, and definitely not the Lauren Mark had invented. Just me. As evening settled, Drew drove me to my parents' house. The neighborhood glowed with Christmas lights, festive and painfully familiar. But the warmth those lights used to give me was gone. Now they felt like props in a play I no longer belonged in. My parents' house loomed ahead, 2 stories, white siding wreath on the door. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. "Do you want me to come in with you?" Drew asked gently. "Not yet," I said. "But stay nearby. Please. I'm not going anywhere." I stepped out of the car, the cold December air hitting my cheeks like a slap. My boots crunched on the snow as I walked toward the door. Each step felt like entering a battlefield, but I didn't turn back. I knocked. The door opened almost immediately, as if they'd been waiting behind it. My mother stood there, lips pressed together, eyes darting over my shoulder as though expecting someone else. "Lauren," she said tensely. "We didn't expect, I know," I said. "But I'm here." She stepped aside reluctantly, and I entered the house. The warmth inside felt suffocating, the air thick with tension and scented candles. The living room was already arranged for the meeting. My father sat stiffly in his armchair. Daniel lounged on the love seat, arms crossed. Emily perched on the edge of the couch, phone face down beside her. And in the armchair to the right, my mother's usual seat, sat Mark. Just seeing him there made my stomach turn. He stood when I walked in, his expression crafted into that perfect mask of concern. "Lauren," he said softly. "I'm glad you came." "I didn't come for you," I replied. My father cleared his throat. "Lauren, we were trying to have a discussion about your behavior." "My behavior," I repeated, eyebrows raised. Or the behavior Mark told you I had. A ripple went through the room. Emily scoffed. Here we go. I turned to her. Do you know how many times Mark contacted you, or Mom, or Daniel? Do you even know how many stories he's told about me? That's enough, my mother snapped. Mark was helping. You were falling apart. No, I said calmly. I was leaving someone who broke me, and he didn't like losing control. Mark stepped forward. Lauren, that's not fair. What isn't fair? I said, my voice still steady. Is you telling my family I had emotional episodes that didn't happen? Or that I was unstable? Or that I was forgetting entire conversations? My father shifted uncomfortably. Well, you did change, Lauren. You became distant, confused. That's because he isolated me, I said. He pushed away my friends. He monitored my messages. He tracked my location. Did he tell you that too? My mother's face flickered with something confusion, doubt. But Mark recovered instantly. She's rewriting history, he said to them as if I weren't in the room. This is classic dissociation. I almost laughed. Dissociation? Really? That's the best you can come up with? He stiffened. Let me make something clear, I said, turning toward my family. Mark sent you emails for years, emails filled with lies. He manipulated all of you. He created a version of me that fit his narrative. Stop, Emily snapped, standing. Nobody manipulated us. We saw how you were. You saw what Mark wanted you to see? I said. The front door opened. Everyone turned. Aunt Miriam stood in the doorway, her coat still on snow in her hair. Actually, she said, stepping inside, I saw what Lauren is talking about. And I think it's time you all start listening. My mother's jaw dropped. Miriam, why are you here? Because, she said, her voice steady. I'm done ignoring what's been happening. The room froze. Mark's mask slipped just for a second. Aunt Miriam walked to my side, standing with me like a line drawn in the sand. I'm here, she continued, because Lauren isn't the broken one in this family. She's the only one finally telling the truth. And for the first time that night, I felt the room shift, not fully, not completely, but enough to know this battle wasn't over, and I wasn't fighting it alone anymore. Aunt Miriam's words hung in the air like a crack of thunder, shattering the rigid formation my family had taken around Mark. Everyone stared at her, stunned, my mother with her lips parted, my father with his brows knit tightly, Daniel frozen mid-breath, and Emily gripping the couch cushion as though bracing for impact. Even Mark's expression faltered just for a heartbeat before he forced his face back into its well-practiced mask of concern. Miriam stepped further into the room, brushing snow from her coat, her chin lifted with quiet resolve. I should have spoken up sooner, she said, her gaze sweeping across my parents. But I'm not staying silent anymore. My father cleared his throat, trying to reassert control. Miriam, this is a private family matter. No, she said sharply. It became something else when you let Mark dictate how you saw your own daughter. A flush crept up my father's neck. That's not what happened. Then what would you call it? She asked. Emily scoffed, crossing her arms. He didn't dictate anything. We saw Lauren's behavior ourselves. What behavior Miriam demanded. Please explain it. I want to hear exactly what Lauren did to convince you she's unwell. The room went silent. My mother opened her mouth closed. It opened it again like she was searching for a script that wasn't there. Well, she started weakly. She became distant and emotional. And she changed. Miriam nodded once. Changed how? She cut people off, my father said. She stopped coming to family events. She stopped trusting us. I felt something cold twist inside me. They were describing symptoms Mark caused, not evidence of instability. Miriam shifted her gaze to me, then back to them. Did any of you ever ask why she pulled away? Did you ever ask how she felt? Or did you only ask Mark? My mother bristled. He wasn't lying. He told us she was struggling. He told you she was unstable. Miriam snapped. He told you she was having emotional breakdowns. He said she was forgetting conversations and acting erratically. He made himself your source, your authority, your interpreter of Lauren's reality. Mark stepped forward now, palms raised. Okay, this is getting out of hand. I only ever tried to help. You know how much I cared about Lauren. Something inside me cracked, sharp, hot, decisive. You cared about control, I said. He turned to me slowly. Lauren, that's not fair. Fair, I repeated. You isolated me from everyone. You monitored my messages. You convinced me Paige was a bad influence. You made me think my own thoughts weren't trustworthy. No, he said, a practiced sadness in his voice. You were overwhelmed. I was supporting you. Supporting me. I laughed bitterly. By tracking my phone. By telling my parents I was mentally declining. By emailing them when I dyed my hair saying it might be a symptom of instability. My mother flinched at that. Mark's jaw tightened. You're twisting things. No, Miriam cut in. You twisted things. He shot her a warning glare, the kind he used to give me when others couldn't see. Stay out of this. But Miriam only smiled slightly. There it is, what Emily snapped. That tone Miriam said. That edge in his voice. I've heard it before. At Thanksgiving 3 years ago, when Lauren grabbed the wrong serving spoon and he got upset, his voice changed just like that, and Lauren shrank in her seat. I froze. I remembered that moment vividly. I'd told myself later that I imagined it. Miriam saw it. She turned to my family. He didn't love Lauren. He managed her. Mark let out a sharp, cold laugh. This is ridiculous. You're all feeding into her delusions. Enough. The voice came from the doorway. Everyone turned. My younger sister Lily stood there, breathless, cheeks flushed as if she'd run straight from the parking lot. Her hair was windswept, her coat unbuttoned, her eyes blazing with something fierce and unshaken. Emily frowned. Lily, what are you doing here? Lily walked into the room, standing between me and Mark like a shield. I came because Lauren isn't delusional. She's right. My chest tightened. You believe me. She nodded once. I've believed you for a long time. I just didn't know how to say it. Mark's face paled. My father stood abruptly. Lily, you don't understand. No, Dad, she said, her voice firm. You don't understand. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to take sides. But after everything I heard today, her voice trembled but didn't break. You need to hear this. She pressed play. A recording filled the room, Mark's voice. Cold, sharp, nothing like the gentle, sorrow-filled tone he used in front of my family. If she tries to tell them anything, make sure they know she's unstable. Tell her siblings she's rewriting the past. She'll get defensive, she always does. Use that. And if she starts pulling away, just say she's isolating again. They'll believe you. My blood turned to ice. My parents froze. Daniel's jaw dropped. Emily's face went sheet white. And Mark. Mark went utterly still, his mask shattering in real time. Lily's voice was quiet but deadly as she said, I found this on Mom's laptop last month. It auto-saved to her cloud. I didn't know what to do. But I do now. My mother staggered back like she'd been hit. Is that real? She whispered. Mark lunged forward. Lily, delete it. Don't touch her. Daniel barked, stepping between them. The shift was instant. In one breath, Mark lost control of the room. In the next, my family finally saw him. Really saw him for what he truly was. Broken. Manipulative. Cruel. Miriam exhaled shakily. There it is. My father sank into his chair, face ashen. Dear God, what have we done? My mother covered her mouth, eyes filling with tears. Emily stared at me, guilt carving deep lines into her expression. And Mark? He stood alone, fists clenched, eyes darting like a trapped animal. For the first time in years, he wasn't the one in control. I was. Mark's composure cracked like thin glass splintering so quickly that the room felt electrified. His eyes darted from Lily to my parents to me, as if searching for the one person who might still cling to his version of reality. But every face he met was blank, stunned, horrified, betrayed. "This is taken out of context," he said finally, voice trembling with restrained fury. "You're all being manipulated. Lauren has always twisted things." "Stop." My father's voice cut through the air with a sharpness I hadn't heard since childhood. He rose slowly, his face pale, his jaw rigid. "That recording was you. Your voice. Your words." Mark's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And you," my father continued, pointing at him, "you have been poisoning our family for years." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. For the first time, Mark looked small, cornered, exposed, stripped of his polished confidence. But then something in him shifted. His eyes hardened, his spine straightened, and his expression settled into one I recognized too well, the cold, calculating version of him that only I had ever seen. "You all want someone to blame," he said in a low, dark voice. "Fine. Blame me. But don't pretend Lauren didn't make it easy." My breath caught. He stared directly at me. "You were a mess long before I ever said a word. Emotional, indecisive, always needing reassurance. I didn't invent your flaws, I just tried to help hide them." "Enough," Lily snarled. But I lifted a hand. "Let him talk." Mark blinked. "What?" "Let him finish," I said. "He's been performing for years." "Let's hear the encore." The corner of his mouth twitched in irritation. "You think this is funny, no? I think it's predictable." He scoffed. "You're doing it again, acting like you're above everyone." "Acting like you didn't drive me to frustration with your moods, your accusations?" "You gaslit me," I said. "That's not a mood. That's a crime." My mother winced at the word. "Gaslit," she whispered, as if tasting it for the first time. Miriam nodded. "Yes, Catherine. Gaslighting. And he did it brilliantly." Mark threw up his hands. "You want to believe her? Go ahead. But I was the only one who actually cared. You think she changed her name because it felt empowering? She changed it because she wanted to erase who she used to be, because she couldn't face the truth of what she did to our marriage. What I did, I said softly. No. I faced the truth every day. That's why I left. For a moment I thought he might lunge forward, but Daniel stepped between us with a quiet warning. Don't. Mark's nostrils flared. You're all insane. No, Lily said. We're finally sane. My father stepped closer to Mark. Get out of my house. Mark let out a humorless laugh. You think you can just throw me out after everything I've done for this family? Yes, my father said. Watch me. Something in Mark snapped. His face contorted with rage. Not the clean, rehearsed frustration he used to weaponize against me, but something raw and ugly. You're all so pathetic, he spat. You want to blame me for your family falling apart? This wasn't my doing, it was hers. He jabbed a finger at me. Lauren has always been the problem, the sensitive one, the difficult one, the one who needed everyone else to validate her. Emily looked at him with disgust. You don't know her, she said quietly. I know her better than any of you, he retorted. No, Lily said firmly. You only knew the version of her you could manipulate. I swallowed hard, my voice even. I'm done letting you speak for me. Mark turned toward my mother, desperate now. Catherine, tell them. You know I'm right. You know she's always. My mother stepped back, tears brimming. I don't know anything anymore. That broke something in him. He moved toward her, but my father grabbed his arm. I said, "Get out." Mark wrenched his arm free. "You're making a mistake, all of you. Get out." My father's voice shook with force. Mark looked at each of us again, no charm left, no facade to hide behind, only a man furious that his script had been destroyed. His gaze lingered on me last. A cold, venomous stare. "This isn't over," he hissed. But it was. He stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. When the echo faded, the room felt impossibly still. No one spoke at first. My parents just stared at one another as if suddenly realizing they were waking from a long, disorienting dream. Finally, my father sank into his chair. "What have we done to you?" he whispered. My mother covered her face with both hands. "Lauren, I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "You didn't want to know," I said gently. "There's a difference." She flinched, not because I'd been harsh, but because it was true. "Why didn't you tell us?" Daniel asked quietly. "I tried," I said. "But every time I did, you had already heard his version. You believed him before you even let me speak." Emily swallowed hard. "We thought we were helping. I know I said. But help isn't help when it starts with assuming I'm broken." My father looked up at me with watery eyes. "Can you ever forgive us?" The question was heavy, fragile, full of decades of expectations. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I'm willing to try. As long as you're willing to listen." "We are," my mother said. "We will." I looked around the room at Miriam still standing beside me, Lily wiping tears from her cheeks, Daniel stunned but open, Emily conflicted but no longer combative. This wasn't closure, not yet. But it was a beginning, a real one. For the first time in years, I felt the power shift not toward me, but toward truth. And that was enough to keep going. The room felt unsteady beneath my feet, like the floor itself was deciding whether to hold me up or give way. My family sat frozen still, processing the implosion Mark had left behind. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one trembling, I was simply tired. Tired but steady. Lily moved first, slipping her hand into mine and squeezing. "You did it," she whispered. "I didn't do it alone," I said, glancing at her, at Miriam, at the fragile cracks forming in the old family walls. My mother wiped her eyes. "Lauren, we need time to understand all of this, to make it right." A part of me wanted to melt into her apology, to pretend we could undo years of damage in one conversation. But another part, the part that had learned to survive, kept me grounded. "I don't need you to fix everything tonight," I said softly. "I just need you to stop assuming the worst of me." My father nodded. "We will. I will." Emily looked down at her hands. "I feel stupid," she murmured. "Blind." "You weren't blind," Miriam said gently. "You were manipulated." "We all were." Emily's voice cracked. "But you tried to warn us, and we didn't listen. It's harder to see the truth when it threatens the comfort you're used to," I said quietly. Daniel looked at me with an unfamiliar expression. Not pity, not frustration, but something like respect. "I think I owe you an apology, too. I was harsh. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong. I know," I said, meeting his eyes, "but you can believe me now." He nodded slowly. A long silence followed, awkward, uncertain, but different. Not hostile, not dismissive. Just real. Finally, my mother exhaled shakily. "Please stay for dinner. Let's talk. As a family." The invitation tugged at something tender inside me, but I felt a pull in the opposite direction, toward the parking lot where Drew waited toward Paige, who had uprooted her day to support me toward the parts of my life I had built myself. "I can't," I said gently. "Not tonight." My mother's face fell just slightly. "Oh, I need space," I said. "Time to breathe, to think. And I think all of you need that too." My father nodded. We do. I grabbed my coat and Lily followed me into the hallway. Are you really leaving? She asked. For now, I said. But not forever. She hugged me tight, fierce, unexpectedly warm. I'm proud of you. The words pierced me in an unexpected way and I hugged her back just as tightly. Thank you. When I stepped outside into the cold night air, snowflakes were drifting lazily from the sky. The world felt fresh, crisp, like something had been washed clean. Drew was leaning against his car, hands in his pockets. When he saw me, he straightened immediately. How did it go? I let out a long breath. Messy, painful, necessary. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me close. You okay? I think so, I murmured against his chest. For the first time, I really think so. He kissed the top of my head. Let's go home. As he drove, the city lights blurred past the windows, and I stared out at them, trying to untangle the knotted threads of the night. There was grief tangled in there. Grief for the years lost, for the trust broken, for the version of me that never got a chance to grow in peace. But there was also something else. Relief. Clarity. The start of something new. When we reached my apartment, I saw Paige standing outside her car, arms crossed against the cold. She hurried over as soon as we pulled in. Well, she asked, studying my face. It's over, I said simply, and it's just beginning. She let out a breathy laugh. That sounds exactly like something a therapist would say. I grinned. Maybe I'm learning. We walked inside together, Drew on one side, Paige on the other, and I felt strangely, beautifully supported. Safe. Later that night, after Paige left and Drew fell asleep on the couch with his hands still intertwined with mine, I sat alone at my kitchen table with a cup of hot tea. I pulled out my journal, the same one I'd used during the darkest parts of my marriage, and opened it to a fresh page. For the first time ever, the blank space didn't intimidate me. I wrote about the meeting. I wrote about truth bursting through old lies. I wrote about my family really seeing me for the first time in years. But most importantly, I wrote this: I am not who they said I was. I am not who he tried to make me. I am mine now. Fully. A soft knock pulled me from my writing. I opened the door to find a single envelope taped to it, my name written in my mother's handwriting. Inside was a short, shaky note. We want to learn who you really are. Please give us a chance. Love, Mom. I didn't cry. I just closed the note, placed it on my countertop, and whispered into the quiet of my apartment, one step at a time. And for the first time, the path ahead didn't scare me. It felt like freedom. Snow blanketed the city the next morning, softening every sound, turning the world into something quiet and new. I woke before Drew slipping out of bed and padding to the window. The street below was untouched. No tire tracks, no footprints, just a clean slate stretching as far as I could see. It felt poetic. After everything that had happened, life was handing me a metaphor so obvious even I couldn't miss it. A clean slate. I made coffee, letting the rich scent fill the apartment, and settled onto the couch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. I expected anxiety to creep in, memories of the confrontation, the echo of Mark's voice, the look on my parents' faces when the recording played. But instead I felt calm, a grounded quiet that settled in my chest like a warm stone. When Drew woke up an hour later, hair rumpled and eyes soft with sleep, he dropped down beside me and kissed my shoulder. How's my warrior this morning? I couldn't help but smile. Honestly, lighter. That's what happens when you finally put down a weight you were never meant to carry. I leaned against him. Thank you for being there. Yesterday. And every day. Always, he said. You deserve people who stand beside you, not people who stand in your way. The truth of that hit me deeply. For so long I had measured my worth in other people's approval, my parents', my siblings' marks. Yesterday showed me how dangerous that was. Today I felt something new taking root, the quiet certainty that my story was mine again. Later that afternoon, I received a text from Lily. We're having a smaller conversation today. Without Mark. Without the chaos. If you want to come. Attached was a picture of the dining room chairs gathered in a circle, no one in them yet. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Drew looked over my shoulder. Do you want to go? I don't know, I admitted. You don't owe them anything, he said gently. But if you want a relationship with them, this might be the first step. I just don't want to walk back into something that hurts. He brushed his hand along my back. Then don't. Or walk in with boundaries so strong nothing can knock them over. Boundaries. A word I once associated with conflict now felt like a gift I could give myself. I texted Lily back. I'll come by later. Not to fix everything, just to talk. Several hours passed before I finally drove over. When I entered the house, the atmosphere was different, not tense or frantic, but subdued. My parents sat on the couch, Daniel in the armchair, Emily curled up quietly in the corner. Lily stood by the window watching me enter with a small, hopeful smile. My mother rose first. Lauren, thank you for coming. Her voice cracked, not with defensiveness this time, but sincerity. I nodded. I'm here to talk, not argue. We don't want to argue either, my father said. We want to understand. Really understand. Emily spoke up next, voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to hurt you. I truly didn't. I thought I was helping. I know, I said. But your help was based on lies he fed you. I need you all to recognize that. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. We do. Yesterday opened our eyes in a way we can't unsee. I'm angry at him. But I'm angry at myself, too. I didn't think for 1 second that we might be the ones failing you. You weren't failing me, I said softly. You were believing the wrong person. My mother covered her mouth with a trembling hand. He made us feel like he was protecting you. Like you needed managing. Like you were slipping away from us. You didn't lose me, I said. I stepped back because every time I reached out, I felt judged instead of supported. My father nodded slowly. We want to rebuild, but we know that has to happen at your pace. A weight lifted from my shoulders. That means everything to me. We talked, truly talked for the next hour. No excuses, no deflections. Just acknowledgement, regret, and the beginnings of repair. They asked how they could respect my boundaries. I told them by listening before assuming, by using my name without hesitation, by giving me room to breathe instead of pulling me into a space I wasn't ready for. When I finally left, the air outside felt crisp and sweet. Healing wouldn't be instant. Trust wouldn't rebuild overnight. But the foundation was finally real. That night back in my apartment, I curled up beside Drew while the fireplace flickered in soft orange waves. I rested my head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. You okay? He asked softly. I am, I said, smiling. Maybe for the first time in a long time. He kissed the top of my head. You earned that peace. I looked around the room, my life, my choices. And for the first time, the past felt like something behind me instead of something pulling me back. Before going to bed, I opened my laptop and typed a message to Paige. Thank you for being there, for believing me before I believed myself. She replied almost instantly, always. Proud of you, Laure. I closed the laptop and let out a long, steady breath. A clean slate, a new beginning. And finally, a life I was writing for myself, one honest chapter at a time. If you've ever had to reclaim your voice after someone tried to rewrite your story, I'd love to hear how you found your strength again. Share your experience below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay with me for more stories about healing courage and taking your life back one truth at a time.